We are going to begin this tutorial by doing a background wash. It doesn't matter what color you choose. For this one, as it's just a practice mountain, it's best to make it a darker wash so that you can see more details on the mountain. And as you continue making more mountains in different kind of pieces, you can vary the background. But for this one, I do suggest doing something a bit darker. So pick any color you choose, and as I usually paint in layers, I've added a bit more color in subsequent layers, and you'll see that as this painting progresses. For this first piece, you can use any white ink or white watercolor you may have. So, for example, you can use gouache. You can also use acrylic. You can use ink. As always, I'm going to be using the Copic Opaque White, which you already know is my favorite. I am going to, let me see if I can show this to you. I am going to saturate the very tip of my brush, just the tip of it, with some ink, and then roughly sketch out a mountain range across the paper. You want to make sure that when you are sketching out your mountain range, that you don't just do straight triangles up and down. If you're looking at a mountain in nature or a photograph of a mountain, that's usually not how they look. They're usually jagged with lots of peaks and valleys, and the lines are never really straight across. So we're going to go down. I like to go up and down, and if you see here, I just kind of let my brush kind of go with the flow. And if you have shaky hands like I do, this is pretty ideal because you don't need to have any straight lines. So you want to vary the height of the mountains, the depth of them, and there you go. So you have your rough outline of a mountain. If you're not happy with it and you wanted to fiddle around with it, you definitely still have time, especially if you have a fairly wet brush and stroke. One of the easiest ways to add shadows to the mountain is to look at every peak and every valley, and then you're going to add the shadow in between them. So what you can do right off the bat is we're going to look at this peak and then this dip right here, this final dip. Okay, so you can go ahead and draw a rough triangle. Remember, we don't want anything that is very symmetrical. So you're going to draw a little triangle and add a little bit more of the opaque white to your brush and fill it in. And let that dry just a tad bit. You want to know how long to let it dry for? I can't even really tell you how long to let it dry for. But we're going to do 2 more while that dries just a little, because you don't want it too overly saturated when you start working on it again. So the next peak is right next to it, but we're going to go a little over, and then the valley is down here. It doesn't have to be a perfect triangle such as that one. So I'm going to make this one a little different. Okay, so we're going to make it thinner on top. And I think that I'm going to show another little peak here. Okay, so we're going to do something like this, but it's all connected to this one area. Okay, so grab some more white. If you see that the blue underneath or the green underneath is getting picked up, then you want to dry your brush off or wash your brush off and go over it again with the white. And we are going to do one more, okay, before we head back over to the first one and start working on that. So the next one, the peak starts right here and it ends down here. So this is a pretty long one. So I am going to give it another little variation here. And we're going to do that. But as you see, it always starts and ends in the same place, okay? And I'm picking up some blue, so I want to clean my brush off, go in with some fresh white, and start again. Sometimes picking up the blue is inevitable, as you see here, and there is definitely a way to fix that, so I will show you in a second. Make sure that before we go on to the first peak, mountain peak, thoroughly clean your brush off. Make sure there isn't any white in it, and get as much water as you can off. You want to leave it a little bit damp, but not too much. Then we're going to go into the edges of this piece and soften them out. So soften out those edges. We're going to soften out the edges and let that white run into it. So this is why I said that you don't want it to be too wet, because you don't want all of the color just leaking out of there, okay? And then I'm just going to continue cleaning off the brush, drying it a little bit, and then continue on the sides, okay? So dry it a little and then continue pulling water out until that entire half of the mountain is wet again. Okay. Hopefully you're not using a color that lifts easily like mine does, but if you are, that's okay. All right, for the final pass, we're gonna go back in, grab some more white, and plop it into that mountain peak, okay? And then just kind of let it do its own thing there. So we're going to leave that one alone. And then we're going to move on to the next one. So this one is still fairly wet, okay? You want to wet the edges so you can bring out that ink a little bit. Continue wetting around, and you'll see that some of this is going to flow in there. That's okay. That's exactly the look that we're going for. I don't like to have super neat edges on my shadows. So if it comes out a little, it's going to make it look a little bit more natural. Then you're going to want to go back in to the white and add a little bit more definition, especially in the middle. That's especially helpful if a lot of your white got contaminated with the blue underneath. All right, I'm gonna soften up a little of these edges and then continue pulling some of that off of the edges, because I don't want super harsh edges on these shadows. So we're pulling those edges out and wetting the rest of the paper, trying our best not to lift up the paint underneath, and I am not doing a good job of that. So we're going to go back in and add some deeper white. You have to clean your brush off in the middle of it, you can go ahead and do that and let that white just seep in to your water. All right, and now we are going to continue with our peaks and our valleys. So the next one is right here, and I'm going to have that one come out there. And then we have one here. Okay, you want them all going in the same direction. And then the last one I just kind of like to add on the side there. So we're going to, once again, do what we did before, clean off those edges or water down those edges, and let the ink soak into the water. You can do that on top as well, and let it soak into the water. And we're gonna add a little bit of the color to the edges of the shadows. But if you see here, I forgot to soften the edge of this piece. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so the next step is to go in with the color that originally was underneath your mountain. So in my case, it is the turquoise. And we are going to show a little bit of contrast between the white areas and the background areas. We want the mountains also to stand out a bit more from the background. So we're going to deepen those areas. We're going to add some color along the edges of where you laid your white ink. So as you can see, I'm adding the color in between the areas where I added the white ink. And you're going to continue doing that for each piece across. Start off with a really wet, saturated mixture, then dry your brush off and then pull the paint across. By starting off with a very saturated brush full of paint, it leaves the most paint or the darkest paint at the very edges of the white. And it pulls in just a bit of that color in order to help with the blending. So we're just going to continue to do this all the way across. Then I'm going to go back, and unfortunately, I forgot to soften out that first white line, so I'm going to go over it with black. Not black. I'm going to go over it with turquoise. And I actually kind of like the way that looks. It makes it stand out just a little bit more from the background. Next, I'm going to pull in a little bit more of the white so that it doesn't look so structured. And I'm just going to do it randomly here and there and add a bit of white texture to other areas of the mountain as well. I am also plopping in some of the turquoise to break up the white a bit. So you'll see me just playing around with it and adding white and turquoise to areas that I didn't have it in before. And doing this just kind of helps the overall look of the mountain. It gives it a more natural feel, and doing it while your piece is still wet helps with the flow so you don't have really harsh lines with the white and with the turquoise. So there you have it. This is a very quick tutorial on the basics of how I make my mountains. You can do this by substituting any of the colors that you see in this piece. So if you wanted to do, instead of having like the white snowy effect or the light effect, you can substitute black instead of white to make it look like it's in a really dark shadow. You can also use this in a very bright, sunny piece and use pink or purple or even yellow if you wanted to show some highlights. So let's say, for instance, if the sun was coming up behind the mountains, you can plop a little bit of yellow into your white to brighten it up. So there are so many things and so many different ways that you can utilize these techniques in painting your mountains. These are just the very basics. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.